Well, hello, that's me again. It's August 29th today, and let's not put things away for too long, and let's get to some crucial headlines. Yeah, where would we go without headlines, of course? But let's start with this. I will, you know my attitude towards the economic specialists in the West. I don't value it in any significant, rate, if you wish, and those people are primarily clowns. And here's yet another proof of this. Again, Business Insider is pretty much as Wall Street Journal or what have you, is a tabloid. It's economic tabloid, the same as the Economist from London. But even they yesterday had to admit that, Wall Street predicted Russia's economy would collapse after it invaded Ukraine. This chart showed that hasn't happened. Of course, it hasn't happened, and it couldn't have happened because people have to study really the real economy and real economic theory, not written by people who teach so-called economics in some US or Western European institutes or universities, and who never run in their life the public toilet, let alone speaking about serious business, let alone speaking about some sectors of real economy, be this energy or industrial output, like machine building complex and something of this nature. So, and in this case, when even tabloid like Business Insider, which was one of the major sources of the BS coming from Ukraine and spreading the propaganda about Russia losing war, then you kind of have an idea. Even they begin to granted, consuming enormous amount of copium, but even they have to, at some point of time, look into the face of the reality, and yeah, the process of getting real is not very pleasant, let's face that. And here's another thing, and when you lose things constantly, and if I speak specifically about the United States loses its wars, it's just fact, you have to come up with something which is like at least explains things, or you can continue pretty much to imagine things and live in the alternative universe, militarily, economically, politically. And one of the best way to do this and cope with this reality, of course, is to write doctrines. And here's the issue. There is a term, it's both in English and in Russian and in other languages, it's called Doctrine-Mongering. And what is this? Is the fact that you get some new occurrence in the sector which you observe, be that industrial sector of military, let alone political, but that's the whole other story altogether, because it's absolutely most of it is the fraud academically. But and you begin to discuss this in terms of how to use this new occurrence, how it kind of gets on with the new process which develops within your field of observation. In this particular case, we're talking about military, and it's very often it relates to some new technology, for example, and technologies do move, obviously, doctrinal development, and some of it is very sensible. We obviously can talk about the development of the tank doctrine, for example, the appearance of the tank, or Little Hart, writing about the development of this doctrine, and obviously then Germans perfecting it, and then of course you look at what Russians and Red Army did with this. Or we can obviously get into the fantasy land, such was Duhé, or Duhé as they call him, Italian military thinker, who described this, air war with those fleets of the bombers, flying and bombing the crap out of respective countries which were there in war between each other. So, but as we know, actually the air war, especially in the World War II, turned out to be a little bit different, despite the fact that obviously the strategic bombing by primarily Anglo-American air forces was obviously the direct kind of branch of Dewey doctrine, but today, when you look at the development of aviation, Dewey is nothing more than a nuisance, or even basically the thing to discuss for history of aviation buffs. But when you begin to see people like American generals writing some doctrines today, and I can give you one doctrine which basically collapsed dismally, it is the future combat systems, and their especially against the background of constant losses and defeats which follow all those doctrines, combat doctrines, military doctrines of the United States, you have to come up with something which tells you, that, it's copium. They need to get to it, because they have to somehow, calm down their rage and understanding that they need to basically undertake some moves to not portray themselves as losers. And here it is, one of the really fascinating things. It's as RT reported, basically, is that there are all indications that Ukraine following US blueprint to fight Russia. This is, of course, we get from the most trustworthy and most, reputable source of the American media called CNN. I joke, of course. I'm joking, of course. So I'm pulling your finger. So, and look what they do. They explain that, my gosh, this magnificent Ukrainian defense is actually done following US blueprint to fight Russia. Okay. So, and the way United States basically conceived how they will fight Russia is one of them is called Resistance Operating Concept, ROC. And obviously, CNN, as RT quotes them, the ROC represents an innovative and unconventional approach to warfare and total defense. And one of those guys, some Lieutenant General Mark Schwartz, he says, it's all hands on deck in terms of the comprehensive defense for the government of Ukraine, explained retired Lieutenant General Mark Schwartz, who was in charge of Special Operations Command Europe during the development of the concept. They are using every resource, and they are also using some highly unconventional means by which to disrupt the Russian Federation military. Well, here's the problem immediately with American generals, and now it could be stated basically absolutely openly, and I will stand by my statement that most American generals are incompetent. They are absolutely incompetent when dealing with Russia, because they don't understand Russia, they don't know Russia, and they don't know Russian military. They do not understand, they cannot grasp how Russian military fights and what is their Russian basically view on their warfare. The reason they cannot do that, because they cannot comprehend this, they simply do not have reference point. And you can study whatever you want. It's like me studying Chinese language. Obviously, I will never be able to do that. I'm not too bright to study it and learn it. But if I learn it, I still will not become Chinese, And the same here is, if you learn Russian, it doesn't mean that you become Russian. It takes much more than that to understand who your enemy is, and United States is profoundly bad. In fact, it sucks badly in understanding the nature of war, and that is why we have doctrine-mongering, non-stop doctrine-mongering on the American side, and as you saw yourself, practical results prove it without any shadow of a doubt that United States doesn't know how to fight war. And I'm talking about real war on the ground. I will leave for now the naval part of it, and let's go and take a look what actually ROC is. ROC is called Obviously it has this wonderful, beautiful name as always. It's resistance operation concept, and as you can see yourself, it's Joint Special Operations, University Press, and again, what are special operations? It's not special operations which Russia conducts right now in Ukraine. It's primarily all those, diversionary sabotage groups. It's special operations like, the psychological operations and, blowing, civilian shit, or blowing their, some military objects, killing here and there, couple of generals and things of this nature. It's not, it's a part of war. It's a very important part of war, make no mistake. But obviously this is absolutely has nothing to do with the combined arms operations and the national scale warfare of which United States has no clue. None of those generals, none of those American SEALs and what have you, all those specialists and division commanders and people who teach in military academies in the United States, they have no clue about what the real combined arms warfare of scale is and what it is when the smart standoff weapons begin to fly into their families' houses, into them in person. So they have no concept. They don't have the grasp of it. That is why I'm getting really sick and tired when some guys say, oh, but we had the, war of the aggression. It was the war of 1861, 1865, which is, of course, American Civil Wars. And I continue to tell them, no. It's called Civil War for a reason, because even people in Atlanta, which was burned, or during the southern operations of the North by Yankees, you still were dealing with the people who were basically you. They spoke your language, they were the same culture, same religion, same what have you. You had political differences, but obviously it's a huge difference when you have somebody who is from completely different culture gets in your house and begins to rape, pillage, kill, execute, and that is a whole different story. And that is why no, United States doesn't know what the war of aggression by other power is since 1814. And again, the battalion size engagements with the British at that time, which resulted also in the burning of the White House, I'm sorry guys, is the pipsqueak on the basically against the background of the huge picture of the world warfare. So let's cut this crap and just face the fact that no American serviceman ever knew what real war is when it comes to your land. And because of that, you have this very, almost schizophrenic, doctrine-mongering with the driving and writing all those doctrines which are very much fantasy land. And we can continue to see what this ROC is, even just when we go to the table of the content and look at this. If you look at this table of the content, you will see yourself that, oh, yeah, here's this, resilience as foundation for resistance, interagency planning and preparation. Then they go to Appendix C and talk about Russian hybrid warfare tactics and considerations. That we'll talk about this in a minute. Then, of course, you have France, World War II resistance, Poland, World War II resistance, and blah, 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 Forest Brothers even, in the Baltic resistance to Soviet occupation. And I'm looking at this basically thing and this table of the content, and my immediate question is, well, it's all fine and dandy, Mr. whatever your name, Schwartz, General Lieutenant, which is the special operations guy. I don't see there two of the greatest partisan and resistance campaigns in history, which dwarf anything else. They certainly dwarf French resistance, let alone, and Polish resistance, which wouldn't have been existing for a long time if Germans would want to put the end to it, but Germans were embroiled in the Eastern Front. And the subjects I'm talking about, of course, are the partisan wars of Russians in 1812 against the greatest at that time military invasion in history by Napoleon and what amounts to basically a European army. And then, of course, we're talking about Soviet partisan movement, which even had its own separate staff in Moscow, and it was unparalleled in scale and damage and operational impact. No, you will not find it there. And the question is now, well, then if you look at the, for example, issue of the Forest Brothers in Baltics, well, guess what? Russians suppressed it. They killed it. You know, simple as that. Poland, and there is in Poland some kind of military capability and resistance, were actually able to survive in the end was because of the operations of the Red Army in the Eastern Front, and in the end it was what is called the offensive operations by Red Army, and of course the Polish units, which became to be known as Wojska Polskie, which is there's nothing there. So the question is now, what kind of doctrine is that? When obviously it's based on some cherry picking, and let me tell you, it is a very specific American doctrine. It's the doctrine based, as always, on the false assumptions and false history, because they cannot, I don't know, maybe they are afraid of it like the devil is afraid of the holy water, because they obviously cannot open books on the basically partisan and resistance movement in the occupied territories of the Soviet Union, which dwarfs in terms of scale anything in the world history, but they just don't do that. They go out, string a number of the cliches and, just absolutely boring, matter of fact things and bunch of the military terminology, and they call it a doctrine. So just to demonstrate to you something very interesting about this doctrine, is this. For example, they go and begin to say, oh, national identity and strong national identity and values are also known as national cohesiveness, are prerequisites for national resistance as they maintain, strengthen the population resilience and motivation to resist. Which is blah, 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 blah. Yes, we know this. Look up there, basically any definition of the nationality, real nationality, not citizenship. And you will get it. So, but when they apply this to Ukraine, and obviously they, as I already stated, they know nothing about Ukraine, despite the fact of the bunch of the American and British instructors and advisors being there on the ground. So, and they just imagine things, the fact, obviously, because they don't understand what modern Ukraine is and why it exists, which is because primarily it's a Western, if you wish, the geopolitical project, and of course they don't understand what Ukrainian national identity is. So, but still, those guys give us advices. They try to convince us that they know how to fight the resistance war, which they don't, because they never encountered any kind of either firepower or the special counter operations by such security services as Russian ones. So, but hey, if you want to do it based on the experience of the successful suppression of the Forest Brothers, hey, go right ahead. Or they can suggest the Bandera or Banderite operations after World War II, where they were, killing children, women, raping them, then boiling people alive. That's their techniques, so why don't they go and advise this? Not that the armed forces of Ukraine and Nazi formations need their advice. They can give any kind of CIA or any other guy a run for their money in terms of how to torture people. So, but here it is. And of course, the immediate moment, it's like litmus test. When you know that this doctrine is nothing than the bullshit compiled by people who have only idea about warfare against undefended people, like in Iraq or Afghanistan, is this. And when you see this, you have to immediately say, yeah, it's bullshit. We know this. Look at this. They state, I don't remember what number of the page, so it doesn't matter. The Russian approach may actually predate both the so-called Gerasimov doctrine and NATO's comprehensive approach. Once you read these phrases, you know that those guys are frauds, and they are. And the reason they are frauds, because, like a litmus test, and here's the litmus test when I know, for example, if I'm talking with a very smart, many of my friends are like that, and educated Americans and people who understand history, who really kind of have the grasp of the events outside the borders of the United States, and when I talk about with the fanboys. The litmus test is this. When me, former Soviet cadre officer, begins to ask questions, but hey, look at this, yeah, in the end, in Normandy, in 1944, our prolonged, being stained and pinned down to primarily beaches and small piece of land, the American and Allied forces undertook the, Operation Cobra. And of course, because of that, they broke out of Normandy beautifully, and then that resulted in the Falaise pocket where a bunch of the German troops have been annihilated. And they say, yeah, you know what, it's Patton's idea. You can stop talking after that with those people because they are morons. And obviously, when me, former Soviet cadre officer, begins to explain to them, no, Patton had nothing to do with this. It was Omar Bradley who basically designed, and obviously under supervision of Ike. Ike approved that. And they designed this, basically planned this whole Operation Cobra. And they say, no, it was Patton. Patton wanted to go to Moscow and, kick the ass of those bad Ruskies. So just stop the conversation with these people. You are talking again with ignoramuses and morons. Same here. Once you hear or read from any so-called American military and combat veterans and all those, Iraq and war and Afghanistan war veterans, you hear Gerasimov Doctrine, immediately stop reading or listening to what they say because they are full of shit. And the reason they are full of shit because Gerasimov Doctrine never existed. And the reason actually this term went into the circulation is very simple. Some political scientist, Mr. Mark Galeotti, the guy who resides and teaches in some, Prague, Czech Republic, Czechia, university. Obviously, he's political scientist, as you might expect, and his only basically claim to any kind Russian understanding of Russia is the fact that he was involved when studying the Russian organized crime, especially in the 1990s, but he is the guy who invented this crap, and he basically launched it into circulation for, obviously, moronic US and Western generally media, and 4 years ago the guy actually had enough integrity to state this. And when you look at this, it's like, what can I say? It's here it is. In foreign policy, 4 years ago, he stated, I'm sorry for creating the Gerasimov Doctrine. And there he says, I was the first to write about Russia's infamous high-tech military strategy. One small problem, it doesn't exist. Absolutely. The same as any kind of the hybrid warfare, they do not exist. Because every war, which ever was fought in human history, starting from the very early ages, is hybrid by definition. You will have two freaking tribes several thousand years ago fighting each other, throwing the goddamn, spears and stones at each other. Guess what they were doing? They were screaming. You know what screaming was? It was a psyops to scare the, enemy. Then you have 1812, Mr. Napoleon, who was doing psyops and actually flooding Russia with the counterfeit money. Every war is always a hybrid warfare, from psyops to all kind of the resistance organizing the behind enemy lines, partisan units and things like that. But when you have the US generals who pretend to know something, especially suggesting or advising the Ukraine, and whose armed forces are slaughtered on the industrial scale every day, and they say, oh yeah, you can, conduct, so to speak, this resistance to Russians, and here's the plan, and here's the Gerasimov Doctrine and hybrid warfare, you know what? It's a waste of time even taking this seriously, because it's yet another example of doctrine-mongering, mindless doctrine-mongering, much of it which is done to basically cover up a complete losing record of the United States military in the 20th, second half of the 20th and 21st century, that it was absolutely incompetent in executing any kind of military operations, and basically having its ass handed to it by primarily third world militaries, with the exception of the triumphant invasion of the Grenada as you might expect, where we had for 7,000 troops which participated in it, the 8,500 something medals have been awarded for this invasion. There you go. And of course we had the Turkish shoot, which was a complete abomination against the backward third world Saddam's army after half a year of actually accumulation of forces with impunity. Wow, so there you go. And that is why CNN begins to report on some nonsensical stuff like this doctrine, and that, oh yeah, or those game-changing American weapons, which actually performed dismally and actually became the butt of the jokes. So yeah, you have to really at some point of time face the reality, and reality of course is not conducive for the inspiring American successes in especially military field, and especially prosecuting of the real industrial scale combined arms operations. But doesn't stop only on that, and as you might expect, my friend Larry Johnson also, he demolishes American media basically beautifully. And as he wrote about also the way the American media report on what amounts to basically right now physical annihilation of the remnants of the mobilization resource in Ukraine is that. And he's talking about all those New York Times and other rags, and other tabloids, and he asks why they promote constantly those histories of the successes. And he asks, what would be compelling evidence of the Ukrainian success? How about having embedded Western reporter accompanying Ukrainian troops who are chasing retreating Russian units? We are not seeing that. During Vietnam War, U.S. correspondents were on the front lines with U.S. military personnel. And obviously it had an impact when people saw that basically the United States was losing visually, by the look of the troops and how they were killed and maimed, that the war was not going well. And that's what he correctly concludes. The absence of daily frontline reports from journalists on the ground showing Ukrainian advances is a critical intelligence indicator of who is winning the battles in Donbass. Like this famous counteroffensive, which did take place actually, well, which is not really counteroffensive. It was again, battalion size attempt on counterattack. Yesterday it ended dismally for Ukraine, obviously. 560 of the people basically killed, 26 tanks burned. So yeah, if you want to attack from basically Nikolaev towards Kherson, good luck with you guys, especially against the intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance complex of Russia. So what can I say? It's all bullshit basically, but they continue to spread it. But even if we look at this, this continued BS, so to speak, still doesn't go away completely. You have to understand that even such tabloid as the National Interest begins to admit, and National Interest was actually on the front lines of spewing their bullshit, and when you look at their, so to speak, military experts, quote unquote, it's laughable, such as Chris Osborne, the guy who was actually at some point of time reporter for Entertainment Today, and he is now a military expert. But look at this. Ramzi Martini, he wrote a big piece in the National Interest, and he basically admitted openly that all the assertions, which not only United States media, which is expected, they will spread any kind of BS, what you will implant it in them, but when you have the Pentagon and Intel, basically people believing this BS from Ukraine, and he says that though these purported assertions are erroneous, and yet they propagate it repeatedly with the Western discourse over the war. Early on, with bias ran amok in the West, the media's glaring and lopsided access into the conflict had also undercut its legibility of what was happening on the ground. And when you read this whole piece, it's not only about media, it's about such people as this American general who supervised this ROC doctrine. You begin to recognize that, my God, you have people in the command, in Pentagon, in the highest, echelons of military political power or intel power. They believed that crap. They bought it. And that, of course, brings us to the most important question. How can you talk to those people? How can you deal to them when they already live in the alternative universe? They live in the alternative universe not only militarily, they live in the alternative universe actually economically. Well, that's why we have the issues here in the United States trying to find definition of the recession, which actually is not going to be a recession. It's already shaping to be a much worse situation than Great Depression. But when you look even at those headlines and you kind of see yourself how desperate those guys to really not to allow panic to set in, but this is the reality of today. The global gas crisis is spilling into the United States. What do you mean spilling? It was always here. It's just a matter of how it's going to be handled. And fact is, with competition for natural gas hitting a fever pitch, many speculate gas prices will continue rising worldwide. Hey, I understand all those, so to speak, economic observers from all those rags and economic tabloids in the West being experts, quote unquote, but truth is, I mean, when you have Mr. Medvedev, former Russian president, and Mr. Novak saying, well, no, we have 3,600 now for 1,000 cubic meters, it's going to be around 6,000. So, and again, the Western economies will cease to exist, actually, not operate. And we already observed this on the viewing the situation with the German economy, which is in the process of committing complete suicide as we speak. And of course, when I look at the very simple headlines, for example, like this from yesterday. We have another 3.8 million renters will likely be evicted in the next 2 months, and why the rent crisis keeps getting worse. And of course, they are afraid to mention the main reason for that. It's a systemic economic crisis and collapse, which is ongoing in the West, partially due to the cretinism of the Western elites, who are absolutely incompetent, and, well, they obviously harbor malice towards the population, especially in Europe. But secondly, because the system doesn't work. It wasn't working since 2008, but of course for people who judge high tech by Elon Musk or by Steve Jobs, and so it's difficult to explain to them what the real economy is, but a real economy is collapsing. And we are facing now, which is basically confirmed by a number of serious sources like Bureau of Labor Statistics, that there are huge layoffs are coming even in the United States. And we'll see where it is all going. But point is, as you saw yourself, when you have people living constantly, residing constantly in the alternative universe, you cannot expect anything good coming out of it. But they cannot break out of this alternative universe, not only because they are pathos-ridden fools who cannot face reality and admit that they are losers and correct their course, which they can't because they are too arrogant. But because they are so utterly incompetent. And this is now across the board. You see their manifestation, and actually it's revolutionary manifestation of incompetence starting from political to economic to military to social to cultural issues. And this is terrifying. Believe me, I am terrified. Can it be fixed? We need to think about it. Possibly something could be undertaken at this stage now to fix it. And again, many people ask me, oh, why don't you go to Russia? First, I'm United States citizen, and it's my country in many important respects. While I may abhor the basically economic order and what is happening socially now in the United States, we lived here for, my God, 30 years now almost. So guys, this is very simple. If you are so, easy to move somewhere, just go and move yourself. But the point is, it's my country, we live here, it's our family, it's our home for all intents and purposes, despite the fact that of course we have connection to Russia. And obviously we care, I do care what is happening in this country, be it even for the very personal reasons. And I don't like what I see. But I'm trying to do my part to educate people, and I'm going to be making videos very soon about how and if the United States could be saved in any sane form. If not, disintegration will follow, and this country will cease to exist as the entity, not just economic power. And that's what I wanted to tell you today. And as always, my profound thank you for my wonderful patrons. It is because of you which I am able to do what I am doing. And those people who want to support me, please support me on Patreon and subscribe to my channel. And I'll be talking to you later, guys. So have a nice week. Bye-bye.